Okay, we're going to move straight on now to our second keynote speaker, Ross McCulloch, who works with an organisation called Third Sector Lab. There's a full description of that in your programme, so I'm not going to read that out. But Third Sector Lab and Ross himself is going to take us into discussing the importance of creating social media policy, which gives staff the freedom, Lauren touched on this, gives staff the freedom to explore and experiment and get the most out of online channels. So Ross has got a wide experience of this in the third sector, and we're going to see and hear some real-life examples of how the most engaging and thought-provoking online campaigns are those which involve people, but also involve some elements of risk. So, can we welcome Ross?
I'm going to talk about risk in social media. Risk from the perspective of protecting your staff, but also risk from the perspective of, well, what happens if we don't actually take chances and try new and innovative things. Pretty much every example that Lauren gave breaks the mould and was trying new things. If people weren't given the freedom and the framework to do that, they wouldn't have taken the risk of trying it in the first place, and that's really, really important. 60% of you in the Digitally Agile CLD survey said that inadequate policy in place was a major barrier to you using digital and social media channels effectively. So hence the reason why I've been asked to speak today. If you do have a policy in place and it was created by the person who looks after your server and it sits on a dusty shelf somewhere and it's 14 pages long, you probably want to reassess it and see what that actually looks like. In my mind, there's really kind of 7 core elements of a social media strategy. I'm not going to bore you by going into each of these in detail. Mark has gathered up quite a lot of really useful resources from across the sector. My slides are shared in the email that you all got. There's a URL at the bottom of each of them which will take you through to further resources, or if there's a case study, you can just click on the link and it'll take you through. But really, you need to be thinking about, if you're empowering your staff to use social media, make sure you write down the simple things like who has control of what channel, what are they allowed to talk about. If you don't want your staff to get involved in a political discussion online, make sure you explicitly say that. If you have negative comments on a Facebook page or a Twitter account, make sure you have a process in place for dealing with that. I was working with an organisation recently. It was a social enterprise, which is an open-air swimming pool. And they'd taken photos of kids 3 months ago, and they decided to use this for promotional purposes on a Facebook page. They'd got written permission from the parents, all very fine and well. Now, a parent came on and said, I'm not really comfortable with a kind of semi-naked picture of my daughter being on a Facebook page, can you please remove it? They had no policy in place, had no process for dealing with these kind of queries. Now, a member of staff took it upon herself to openly say, we've got your permission to use this photograph, so we're just going to use it, tough luck. And this then became a very open debate on a Facebook page where lots and lots of local parents came on board and said, this is shocking, you shouldn't be using this image, please take it down. And this member of staff just continued this debate in this open Facebook page. Now, our boss eventually realised this was happening. Oh, there's some nice bubbles, isn't that interesting? They aren't my bubbles, can I just be clear about that? Our boss then saw this kind of very open discussion and said, God, what are you doing? But she hadn't been told, look, this is how we want to respond to negative comments. Obviously, the obvious thing she should have done was just to remove the photograph, apologise to the parent. If a policy had been put in place, this wouldn't have happened. So really simple things like that, they happen once in a blue moon, but when they do happen, they blow up spectacularly. This is actually from the International Red Cross's social media policy. Most social media policies are about common sense. The problem is if you don't spell out what common sense is to your staff, you can't expect them to just know it. So think of CNN, your mother and your boss. Don't say anything online you wouldn't be comfortable seeing quoted in CNN, being asked about by your mother, or having to justify to your boss. Fairly simple stuff, but make sure you write down what that simple stuff is. Feel free to pinch that as well. A social media policy doesn't need to be huge, it could literally just be a page. Louise McDonald, I think, is a really good example of someone operating at quite a high executive level, Chief Exec of Young Scott, and she really kind of gets social media and empowers her staff to do it. pretty much every member of staff within Young Scot has some form of social media account. Mainly Twitter they use quite effectively, but at the core of it all is that all their staff use social media to be interesting and useful. Following on from having a policy, you should have a strategy. How many people in the room have a strategy for social media? Nobody. Excellent. Right, you can steal this. The only thing you need in your strategy is to be interesting and useful. If you're not interested and useful, don't bother using Twitter or Facebook. I mean, Lauren's kind of touched on this point already. People don't want to hear organisational updates. That kind of stuff, fine for your staff, fine internally. Don't just kind of use Twitter as a way of pumping out organisational updates to people. So once you've got a policy in place, you've protected your staff, you can be interesting and useful with social media. That only comes through taking risks. This is my daughter Olive, who's 18 months old. I was up working in Inverness this week. I actually spent most of the last night on a replacement bus service from Inverness, which is why I'm kind of bleary-eyed at the moment. But I took her up with me, and we were sitting having breakfast in the hotel in the morning, and I turned around and looked at her, and she was dipping pretty much everything from her breakfast into her cup of grapefruit juice. So she had like jam on toast, that was going into the grapefruit juice. She was eating that, sausages, you name it. Incredibly disgusting. I would never sit and do that at breakfast, but the only way she's going to find out the stuff that she enjoys and the stuff that she likes is by experimenting and taking risks. So dip your toast in grapefruit juice. That can go in your strategy as well. You can steal that. I mean, a good example of this is the importance of kind of taking risks, but also experimenting and trying things time and time again, accepting that you will fail, and that is a really important part of the learning process. Everyone in this room works in the learning sector. You know that students have to fail, they have to try things, they have to experiment. Things sometimes go wrong, that is fine. The average National Geographic photographer shoots about 400 shots before getting the picture that ends up in the magazine. James Dyson, who Lauren's already spoken about, over 5,000 prototypes of his vacuum cleaner before he actually got to the DC-01, which eventually got made and made him lots and lots of money off the back of it. And most importantly, the average couple has sex about 104 times before conceiving. Now, if all of our parents had given up after that first time, none of us would be here today, so think about that. Okay, I'm going to go through a few examples of organisations which are traditionally very stuffy and very boring, some of them quite big organisations as well, who have done very simple things with social media, taken some risks and had successes off the back of it. This is the NHS in Kent, who developed an iPhone app which was basically about helping teenagers find free condoms close to them. Integrated really simply with Google Maps, and it has safe sex advice in there. Brilliant, works with your GPS. Now, they faced the wrath of parents by doing this, who were very disgruntled that the NHS were basically saying to your teenagers, go away and have sex, here's how to get condoms really close to you. Now, the NHS took that risk because they realised that if they hadn't done this app, they were cutting out a massive demographic of people who weren't going out to the clinic to find a leaflet, to then go and speak to someone about getting condoms and finding it out through the traditional routes. The iPhone app helped these people find condoms that were close to them. This is an actual tweet from Solihull Police's official Twitter account, which went out in December there. Now, for me, this is a brilliant example of an organisation who have used humour to inject a bit of a human element into what they do. Now, 99% of Solihull Police's stuff that they do is about community safety, it's about protecting the citizens of Solihull. They very cleverly realised that once they'd done this raid in Chelmsley Wood and found all this cannabis, that if they'd just put out a bog standard statement saying, we are working in the community to protect citizens of Solihull, and we have seized £350,000 worth of cannabis, that probably would have been retweeted on Twitter about 17 times. It would have been really boring. What happened off the back of this is we can see that that was retweeted over 22,000 times. Now, that's 22,000 people sharing that tweet with their followers. If we take a conservative estimate that, let's say those people each had 100 followers, very minimal amount, they probably had more, that's 2.2 million people saw that tweet about Solihull Police and about the work they do to protect people in the Solihull area. That's 2.2 million people who potentially then go on and engage with the police on other matters. So really good example of using humour, but just being human when you use your accounts.
Did it get collected?
Sorry? Did it get collected? I don't know, actually. That's a good question. In fact, do you know what? We can all, anyone who's got a Twitter account just now, at Solihull Police, drop them a tweet and ask them if anyone came in and asked for the cannabis. That'd be interesting to know. University of Birmingham, dead simple example. They have started teaching social work students about the importance of social networking as a personal development tool and as a learning tool as well. And obviously they could teach this in a classroom. Brilliant, but how do you teach these kind of skills in a classroom? So they've actually moved that entire module onto Facebook. Nearly every single person in the course had a Facebook account. So rather than building some expensive platform and deciding, right, we need to do this, this and this and spend £20,000 building a bespoke social network for this tiny module, they used Facebook groups to deliver that module of the social work course and had massive success. There were some failures in it as well. Again, if you click on the link at the bottom, there's a full academic paper on how that worked. And all of you in this room could probably take some of that learning, take it away and do something with that. Number 10 Downing Street. Has anyone heard of Larry, the chief mouser to the Cabinet Office? The Cabinet Office traditionally has a cat that catches mice. That's something that's existed for a long time. They go to Battersea Dog and Cats Home and they get a cat that's in there. The cat comes in and kills lots of mice in Downing Street. Great. What they didn't do is they never actually told that story or kind of said, they never took pictures of the cat, they never kind of told the cat's story. Now you might think this is very flippant and throwaway. The person who's the digital comms person for the Cabinet Office explicitly says, this example, she did not do this for fun. She did this with the sole purpose in mind of engaging with people who wouldn't traditionally engage with the very serious issues of the Cabinet Office. Now, what happened is that the engagement in their social channels absolutely skyrocketed off the back of this because people were interested in Larry the cat. Now, if even a small handful of those people then go on to engage with the serious work of 10 and Downing Street off the back of it, that was worth the effort. Now, this was all done online. There was no expense. They basically took some photos of the cat, told the cat's story. They saw a huge increase in visits to the 10 Downing Street website off the back of this. Is anyone in the room an O2 customer? One person, two people. Maybe nobody's an O2 customer because this happened. O2, the entire network went down in July last year, affecting millions and millions of people across the UK. Now, they could have gone onto their Twitter account and just said the usual boring kind of corporate statement, O2 is working to resolve this issue, we'll be back up, blah, 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 usual kind of stuff. What they did instead is they responded to every single person who had a query or a complaint personally, sometimes using humour. I will not mention some of the examples. There's a whole Wired article about this. Some of them are quite offensive, but very funny. And what we see is that at the start of the outage, when things were going wrong, people were really angry. They went on Twitter to express their anger about O2, and they were annoyed they couldn't use their mobile phone. But because O2 responded to people personally, off the back of that, we actually see a massive, sharp increase in tweets and blog posts and forum comments that actually the sentiment is people loving O2. So that green line is love and the orange one is happiness. So there was about 450,000 counts of people mentioning that they love O2, despite the fact that the entire network was down. Now, that was purely because they didn't shy away from the fact that things were going wrong and they addressed it on a very kind of human level. Okie doke, Monmouthshire Council. For the local authorities in the room, Monmouthshire Council are a really, really good example of a local authority who are doing interesting stuff with digital media, often using free tools like YouTube, Twitter and Facebook, and using it as a way of engaging with audiences who wouldn't traditionally engage with quite boring topics. So they use their YouTube channel as a way of talking about the budget that they're about to release for the council. The councillor goes on and he talks about the budget, and people can ask questions off the back of it. They can leave comments on the YouTube channel. They've gathered up, there's a thing called Digital Monmouthshire, and they've got loads and loads of case studies. They're very, very open about what works in the council, some of the experiments they've done, what didn't work so well. Worth checking out. Greenpeace UK. Greenpeace took the quite bold move of opening up their Twitter account to any member of staff who wanted to use it. Could be the receptionist in the Greenpeace office in London. It could be a man shouting at Japanese people on a whaling ship. Basically, anyone who wanted to use their Twitter account could tweet from it. Dead simple concept. For most of you in the room, that's probably quite scary. Now, nobody died off the back of this. Nobody got sued. Nothing went horribly wrong. In fact, what happened is it opened up Greenpeace UK and it showed the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. Now, if that had just been their comms team doing these tweets and the tweets had come in from, I don't know, the person on a ship somewhere going, could you please tweet about this? And then that comms person went, oh, and vetted it and then changed it and then it went out 2 days later. There's no way they would have got this broad picture. We saw things like there was photographs going out of people training, going up ropes for when they're on the ship in the middle of the Atlantic. Amazing stuff came out of it. If they hadn't opened up that account, none of that rich content would have came out. Equally, if you think that's scary, the entire country of Sweden did exactly the same thing. The Swedish government opened up their Twitter account and they said to every Swedish citizen, if you want to use the Twitter account, you can use it. Apply. If we think it's appropriate, you'll get to use it. We had a farmer who was on there talking about what he does on a day-to-day basis, a tattoo artist, loads and loads of Swedish citizens getting control of the account for a few days, a week at a time, and talking about what they do. Really, really amazing stuff came out the back of that. Final one, this is one we worked on last year with Parent Across Scotland for their conference. At the conference was the launch of the National Parenting Strategy. Now, we were kind of tasked with bringing social media to the conference, but also kind of more than that, engaging parents in the discussion, engaging parents in the National Parenting Strategy. Now, if you mention the words National Parenting Strategy to anyone, let alone an ordinary Scottish parent, they're going to fall asleep, let's be honest. So we had to kind of almost turn it on its head and think, well, how do we get parents talking about it? So rather than asking them, what do you think of the strategy, we asked them this very simple question: what would make Scotland the best place in the world to bring up your children? We used Twitter as a way to connect with lots and lots of parents who blog and who use social media channels. What happened is we got about 15, 20 blog posts from ordinary parents and really just talking about what they think needs to change in Scotland. So whether that was affordable childcare, whether it was better access to outdoor spaces, whatever it happened to be. And what we saw is that this debate and discussion between politicians, third sector organisations, frontline staff, but also importantly parents, which had never really happened before. A lot of these types of conferences, you kind of see the usual faces, the usual organisations talking about stuff, but the actual people that they're there to support, in this case parents, very rarely are involved in the discussion. So when it came to the actual conference itself, using the hashtag #PAS12, we saw tons and tons of parents getting involved in the debate. There was a live tweet screen going up. Alex Salmond started tweeting, but Alex Salmond was there on a live tweet screen talking to parents as well. Worked incredibly well. I've gathered up all the blog posts and some of the kind of case studies at the bottom there, so you can have a wee nosy at how that worked. Okay, so it's your turn to do some talking. What I want you to do is take 5 minutes to discuss this question at your table. I won't take a simple yes or no answer. I'm going to be very harsh and teachery about this. So basically to talk about, does the CLD sector need to take more risks with social media? Equally, if you're on Twitter, you can use the DACLD13 hashtag to ask people on Twitter about this as well. So take 5 minutes and then we'll come back and get some feedback from you.
So is there anything else we should be thinking about doing with national agency? They have to just share so much more than you would be comfortable with. But surely we have to think about how do we work before it? And training them how to use it. The dangers of being on, like, people put their profiles out there.
Do we need to take more risks? Are we taking enough risks at the moment? Does anyone have anything to add from the discussions at their table? Yep, one person in the middle there.
Our table said that if we don't take the risks, then other people will.
Yeah, that's a completely valid point, yeah, absolutely. Anyone else?
I think CLD recognises the value and the use of social media, but there's an issue of staff training.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because about half the people that I work with would like to use it, but they're scared because they don't know how to use it and they're frightened to get into trouble. Although we have quite a clear media policy, quite a new social media policy, there's an issue of staff training.
Yeah, no. I can shamelessly plug our services then. We train organisations in how to use social media, so if you do need that, then come and speak to me. My contact details are up there. But yeah, no, it's a valid point that you can't just throw people in the deep end and expect them to know how to use it.
We found that guidance can often be written by people who don't
understand the media themselves.
Yeah.
And so you may often have to write your own. But also that often we're demanded to justify where we're directing the energy and how we're using it, when often we need to experiment. We're asked to give too much up front before we can even go on there.
Absolutely.
To justify it. And one of the other things that did work was allowing people to run their own sites. So in Clap Manager's case, there was a youth council who run their own Facebook page.
Yeah.
So that gives some freedom.
Absolutely. And I think kind of Lauren touched on this in her talk about the fact that it's about being human. It's amazing how many local authorities allow their IT department to write the social media policy, whereas they're not the people that are engaging on a day-to-day basis with learners or social work teams or whoever it happens to be. Just the idea that the guy that fixes your server is the guy that's dealing with all your communications, just terrifying. Yeah, I'm not being disparaging of IT people at all. I'm just saying that that is not necessarily where that role should sit. There's a question there.
I actually think that most of the social media policies that are around that Mark circulated fairly heftily, were actually written by staff that were involved with young people and wanted to use social media.
No,
the point is, it was to let them do the paranoia one.
Yeah.
The 40-page one log about use of IT, which actually only needs one sentence, which is "don't take the piss."
Yeah.
And so what I think the problem was that people didn't go off their arse and actually be proactive about it in the early stages, and now they don't need to be because they've just cut and paste.
Yeah.
So I think that's the important thing. You have to lead on that.
No, I think that, yep, completely valid point. I mean, the problem with that is that, I mean, I can't mention the organisation. I know an organisation that has lots and lots of very good video content, for example, and works in the mental health sector. They are not allowed to do anything with that content. It sits on a server in-house because the IT person has convinced them that you get viruses through YouTube. Now, that's just ridiculous, but if the person that is in control of whether these decisions actually happen is being leaned on by someone who's told them these things, it's very difficult for them to make decisions if they're being told you're going to get a virus using a YouTube channel. But you're absolutely right that the best policies are written by the people who, on a day-to-day basis, are working with these individuals. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or points?
Emma Whitelock here in Scotland. I think when we talked to our staff about social media policy, which we kind of involved a lot of people in writing one page, and it kind of helped people think, great, so we've now set the boundaries here, so now I don't need to work 24/7. As a frontline worker, I've been using it as a tool for engagement, and I've been reading things at 3 in the morning, or I've been feeling I should be more and more responsive. So it was quite good to be able to say, this is the line in the sand. You can still have a social media policy, you can still be more open and accessible than you've ever been, but have a boundary, a personal and professional boundary, because that seems to be quite a big issue for people, and I notice people, they do what it takes to get it done, and which means that boundary is potentially overstepped.
Yeah. No, I mean, drawing boundaries is really important. I mean, the amount of organisations that work with young people, and those young people will expect to be friends with one of your members of staff on Facebook. It will happen. Undoubtedly, it happens all the time. If you do not write down in your policy that that is not acceptable, you have not told them what the boundaries are, and you're putting the onus on your member of staff to make that call, which I personally think is completely unfair of a frontline youth worker to be making those decisions. They need to say, our policy clearly says I can't be friends with you on Facebook, and that's important. And if you're going to protect your staff, you need a policy in place, even if it is just one page. In fact, if it's a page, brilliant. That's great. Okay, thanks everyone. Cheers.